Good morning, everybody. It's a little bit dark this morning because it's raining. Beautiful day today. It's your morning drive with Adam, and it is time to continue our discussion on faith. So we're going to look in Hebrews 11 today on continuing our look at the Hall of Faith, if you will, and all of the people who have kind of set examples for us for what faith should look like. And we're going to be continuing today with Moses. So if you remember, we talked about Joseph yesterday, and Joseph is now he brought his family back from Israel area into Egypt because there was a great famine, and they just kind of stayed there for a while, quite a while, several generations, enough that there were a lot of Israelites now in Egypt. And the Egyptians over time accepted them, and they kind of had their own area, and then slowly those Israelites became the servants and then the slaves of the Egyptians. So that ended up happening. One of them, during that time, there were apparently too many Egyptians, or just too many Israelites. So the Pharaoh at the time put a decree out that all of the firstborn children of the Israelites, my face is very red from these brake lights. Sorry, all of the firstborn children were going to be killed, unfortunately. They were going to be slaughtered, all the Israelite children. So there was this big massacre across the land. It was so, not the firstborn, anyone 2 or under needed to be killed, and that's just atrocious, horrible. Can't believe that stuff like that happened. But anyway, that happened, and it was by faith that Moses, during this time, his parents had their faith in God to actually go against what was happening, and knowing that God was going to take care of them. And what they ended up doing is they hid Moses for 3 months before finally they put him in a basket and put him down the Nile River with hopes that maybe somebody would pick him up and take care of him. And so Miriam, who is Moses' older sister, actually kind of followed the baby down the river and hid in the reeds. And eventually the basket arrived at the palace, the palace of the Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's daughter was, I don't know if it was actually at the palace, but like Pharaoh's daughter was down there, and she found the basket with the baby in it and ended up adopting the baby as her own. And then Miriam, long story short, Miriam ends up telling Pharaoh's daughter about the mom, and then they end up actually having the mom come in. And anyway, so Moses was still kind of had his official mother in his life for a little while, which is very different from the Prince of Egypt version, if you ever watch Prince of Egypt. But it's what actually happened. Like, his mom was able to kind of take care of him, but he was officially a Prince of Egypt. He was one who lived within the palace itself, but never really forgot his Hebrew origin. And so that's the idea of Moses. But we'll continue Moses tomorrow. What I want to look at today is the faith of Moses' parents. And just that's got to be rough. You got to think about, like, when we talk about making hard decisions, there can't be probably a harder decision than what they had to make. I mean, their son was going to die. So, of course, any good parent is going to do their absolute hardest to try to keep their child safe. They would do anything that in their power to do so. And so sometimes that means, and this is where one thing that I want to touch on real quick before we move on is, like, a lot of people ask, like, well, what do you do if the government is breaking, the morality? And it's like, well, in most cases you want to follow, God talks about, you want to follow the authorities of the land placed in front of you. And so he's going to follow, we need to follow the laws that are put there. But if that law is going against God's direct law, and it is clearly immoral, it is okay for God's law to supersede man's law. It should be where God's law supersedes man's law. So in those cases, when something is very clearly apparent, as long as it is not going against God, you should follow that law. For example, paying taxes. Paying taxes is not something that goes against God's law. A lot of people I've talked to have been like, it's immoral. Like, no, it's inconvenient and obnoxious, but it's not immoral. But stuff like slaughtering children, clearly immoral. So that's something that we should definitely be fighting against. But side tangent. You got to think about the faith of that. They had to literally almost give up their child. They had to put their child in a basket, send it down the river, not knowing what the end result could be. And this can relate a lot, and I know it doesn't relate to you guys as much because you don't have kids, but your parents are going through a little bit of stuff right now. Some of you are going to be ready for college, some of you moving on, and they have to like basically give up their kid. They have to have their kid go to college and send them off to places where they don't know what it is. And you understand, like, parents, while you may not remember, the first few years of your life, they remember, and they remember, having to change you and all of that kind of stuff, a little kid, and like being very vulnerable, and you were completely dependent upon them, like you as a teenager, and as a young kid were completely dependent upon your parents, and now you are completely independent and don't necessarily need your parents anymore, and that's kind of a hard thing for them to accept. And that's the faith that they have to do. And so, or they have to like show that they're going to be sending their kid out into the world not knowing what's going to happen to them. And how much more difficult was it for them for Moses' parents, who had to send out their infant, their baby, out into the world. And it's just really difficult for them to have to accept. And so remember that one day, teenagers, whenever you become parents, how difficult that might be to be able to send your kid off into the world and not really knowing what's going to happen to them, and the faith that could happen. So for you guys, maybe it's a decision that you have to make. Maybe it's something that you have to let go. Some of you might be moving on to different chapters in your life, moving into career fields, moving into college, whatever it might be. It's scary. Transitioning times are scary. And so it's okay to be fearful. It's okay to be worried about it, but don't let that fear or worry consume you. That's where that faith comes in, because in the end you have to keep telling yourself and rely on the fact of who is God and what is his promises to you. And so keep reminding yourself of that God is in control, that God is a good God, and that he is going to take care of you during this time, and that he promises to work all things out to the good of those who are called according to his purpose in Romans 8. So I challenge you today, go find that verse in Romans 8. I'm not going to tell you what specific verse it is. I want you to go read Romans 8. I want you to find that verse in Romans 8, and I want you to memorize it, start to memorize it. Anyway, I want you guys to think about that today. Let's go ahead and pray, and then I'll send you guys on your way. God, we thank you so much for today. Thank you for giving us your word as an example to show us that we can read about people like Moses and Moses' parents. And I think a lot of times we overlook some of those people in the Bible, like Moses' parents, who don't necessarily get the spotlight. Like, I don't even think that they got an official name. I have to go back and look, but we definitely don't know Moses' dad's name. We might get his mom's name, but God, I'm just so thankful that you care about every person, and that you've shown us ways, very realistic and very recognizable ways, to showcase faith and how we can learn that faith. So God, teach us today what faith is and how we can lean on you during transition times, during times when we have to give up something. Help us to lean on you in that time. God, we love you so much. We thank you for your son and his sacrifice, and we just pray that today we can honor you in all that we do. In your precious name we pray. Amen. Have a great day, guys. Love you, and I'll see you tomorrow.